Lights on?
They're on down here.
Hold on to it. Press hard. There you go.
Good evening. Today's date's October the 25th, 2021. I'd like to call to order the meeting of Bellbrook City Council work session. You want to call the roll?
Sure will. Excuse me, Mr. Hoke,
Here.
Mr. Havens,
Here.
Dr. Van Valheisen,
Here.
Mr. Greenwood.
Here.
Mrs. Middlestetter.
Here.
Mayor Schwell.
Here. Thank you. Before you have the meeting minutes of our last work session on October the 11th. Does anyone have any changes or additions to those minutes?
No, Mayor.
None, Mayor.
No.
Seeing none, the minutes are accepted as submitted. I'd also like to welcome our two special guests tonight, Chief Doherty and Chief Pizarro. Thanks for being here. Tonight is the budget work session discussing the police budget and the fire budget and an overall budget update. With that, I'll refer to City Manager Schomer and let you take it from here.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor Council. Tonight we have our budget work session regarding, as the Mayor said, our fire and police budgets. We've assembled a couple of worksheets here for you that I'll just kind of briefly go over, and then we can have some highlights, and then any specific questions we can certainly ask the chiefs that are here. So I'll start off with the fire fund. As you see, the 8.5 by 11 sheet that I have here, that's kind of a forecast going out a few years. Should say fire fund on it, and kind of goes back a few years. I can't answer for too much beyond 18. I made sure that what we had was accurate from that point forward, but what's really important is what's in the blue, starting next year moving on. In brief, that's an estimate of revenues, an estimate of expenses, and then what we're looking at primarily are the transfers in. As you can see previously, there's a significant amount of transfers in for the subsidy from the general fund into the fire fund to assist in covering the cost of operations there while maintaining the required balance. Although the city does not have a current policy for fund balances, that is something that we're going to be working on to determine what that balance level is and should be. There's certainly some standards out there, but that's and it would be different per fund. General fund requirements will likely be different than perhaps some of the special revenue funds and the enterprise funds. But we will be working on a fund balance policy as well. Looking into under the expenses, you see the category showing difference. That's basically the differences moving forward. 2022, as you can see, it's only showing a small difference compared to other years. That has a lot to do with a change in revenue due to the fact that the carryover is a little bit larger. As you recall, in 2020, there was a significant amount of COVID funds that was used to cover some of the cost of expenses for salaries, et cetera. So we're still seeing and utilizing the benefits of that reduction from the fire fund usage. The important showing is the bottom couple of ones. That's the projected ending balance of, we'll say the estimated ending balance of the fire fund moving forward. As you recall also, I want to make sure to point out, we've released a couple of current fund balance reports, but remember that was to date, and there are still expenditures left for the rest of the year. So after you reduce those expenditures, those fund balances as of the end of September, obviously are going to be significantly different because we have 3 more months of payroll, we have holiday pay periods, things like that will be reducing those down. So our estimates moving forward, you can see, considering transfers in, maintaining, we basically run into a situation within the next 3-4 years that we can start to deplete the fund balance in the fire fund. So we want to be cognizant of that moving forward. We want to be aware of making sure that we establish and set and maintain our fund balance policy. And that's just kind of a bit of a forecast. I will say that for the overall budget presentation, we'll snapshot all of that to show you how that particular fund fits into the overall budget itself, and have a little bit more forecasting and some trends that we can use to identify to see how the 2022 budget fits in for our next 5 years and what the effects would be. Jumping into the larger sheet of the fire fund, that's the actual worksheet that we've assembled for putting together the different sections and the line items. You can see the top is revenue. You can see that we go back a little ways to show. We also added the two gray columns, the difference between 19 and 20 and 20 and 21. We wanted to illustrate that mainly to show that's the difference pre-COVID money and the difference post-COVID money, because that did affect the fire fund. It did show an increase in available fund balance from those years to years. Basically what we've got going into this is, as you note, the fire division or fire department is absent a administrative chief or a deputy chief position. Chief Bizzaro feels confident that the efficiency of the department is working well as it is. And although that those funds were budgeted and those funds would still counted to be budgeted on, we would like to present the option to council moving forward in budgets that we utilize those funds to set aside to build possibilities for continuing the idea of adding to the current fire station so that we can address reuse or repurpose of abandoning Station 1 in its entirety. So we feel that if we keep that and basically redirect and reprioritize the availability of those annual funds into more of a capital approach to make sure that the station would be up to date to house the entire operations for the fire department, that may be of some good benefit to make use of getting some movement on the buildings downtown. So we'll want to drill down to that and analyze it a little bit more. But we know that by keeping those funds, maybe not all of them, but the majority of them available, rather than allocating them to personnel, we set those aside in capital to use for future use in that. So you will see that those funds are still included, and they're listed in a line called other contingency facility. But again, this is just a worksheet until we finalize where those funds are placed, whether it's in capital or whether we do just remove it altogether from the overall operations. But we want to say we don't want to reduce the budget by that amount. We want to simply reallocate it for the current needs of the division or the department, and that's more facilities than personnel. Moving on down in the expenses for the salary portion, it's basically a formula of where we are plus factoring in. We're still working on worksheets to itemize it actually by employees so that we can get some exact figures. So right now, there are estimates based on the 2.5 increase and kind of carrying that across the board. So you're going to see some changes in those numbers once we truly identify what the actual costs are. We actually are still balancing from back in April, starting from May on, to reconcile and make sure with the conversion. The rest of it are basically the operations or the other expenses divided up in two main groups: contract services, supplies and materials, and other expenses. And I can let the chief talk about a couple of the main changes that you see that there's notes on regarding some changes for reporting and that we talked about earlier. So if you wanted to explain that real quick and then see if there's any questions.
Sure. So one of the areas that we discussed earlier about changes, if you look on the second page there, under radio maintenance fees, it's line item 5360. There's a reduction of radios. When we were more of a combination volunteer fire department, we had a portable radio in every riding position of all the apparatus. Since our volunteer numbers are 0 right now, I don't feel that there's a need to have each of those spots to have a radio, which means extra maintenance, replacement of batteries, everything that goes along with that. So everybody is issued a radio when they come in for duty in the morning, and then they're responsible for that radio throughout the day. We are leaving one radio on each piece of apparatus for mishaps. Somebody forgets the radio or whatever, that there will be at least one extra radio on each of the apparatus. But that'll save approximately 15 radios that we don't use on a regular basis. One of the other areas, the line right above it, upgrading the RMS, move it on down to hardware software 5403, new RMS equipment. So what we're looking at is migrating over to what's called New World with Green Central. And what that is it's a system that allows for information to be sent electronically to the apparatus themselves. There will be a computer, a tablet in each of the pieces of apparatus. All the important information will come across to that. The guys will be able to then be able to see that information as they're responding. We'll also be able to share with our neighbors pre-plans and everything like that. So if we have neighbors coming in on a fire for us, they'll be able to see our pre-plans for those businesses, just as we'll be able to see the pre-plans to other businesses throughout the county. So that would be a big upgrade for us to be on that system with the rest of the fire departments throughout the county. So those are just a couple of the changes and increases that we'd like to see for this upcoming year.
Could you say what is the pre-plans with?
So the pre-plans, we have a pre-plan. It's basically a map of every business inside the city. And the map shows us where the utilities are located in the business, where the electric panel is,
Okay.
if there's a water shut off, how far away it is from a fire hydrant, what is the approximate amount of water flow it would take to put out that building if it was on fire.
Gotcha, okay. Diagram of what the building
Exactly,
is.
yep.
Okay.
Would they be able to access that on this computer when they pull up to a site?
Correct. So they'll have all that information en route going to that. So the tablet will be up front for the officer, the front right passenger. So all that information will be at their disposal, just hitting the tabs going through. The other thing it does is it limits the amount of radio traffic that goes across the air, which also decreases some of our fees that we pay to Green Central because it's push to talk on some of the fees that we occur there. So there would be less fees for there. Not significantly a lot, but there will be less fees associated with that without having all the extra radio traffic.
Are those plans already in place, or is that something we need to populate?
Those plans are already in place. All it is scanning them in and adding them to the software.
Cool.
One of the things that we keep updated when the crews go out and do inspections is they make sure everything's still the same with the buildings. ISO comes in, they want to see that information, so we've been doing that for years, and then when they go out and do their annual inspections, they just make sure everything is the same. There hasn't been any major changes or anything like that to the businesses.
I have a question about a line item. It's just under 5443, and it lists other contingency facility capital, and it's $150,000.
Sure, so that's where the city manager was talking about holding on to that position and just allocating that money into another spot instead of actually putting
Got
it
it.
in its
Copy
own
that.
line.
So it adds up funny. If you look at the 23 budget, it's 212,600, which is a 77.26% increase. And I look over into the column relative to what?
So
That'd be-
that particular line item itself didn't exist in any other, and that's not really a line item yet. It's just placing that money, as I indicated. We're not sure where it's gonna fall, and because it falls there, it just adds into a total of the overall total of the budget for the expense side of 1.534. So I wanted to illustrate that somewhere to say those funds will still be appropriated and utilized, whether they will be, moved to capital rather than a fire fund, whatever they might be.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to illustrate that because it would be a fire-related type of expense.
Okay, I'm just trying to get the math right, though. So
Okay.
77.26% increase. I would assume that would be,
That's an increase of that section of supplies and materials, and that's so much higher because that 150's in there that wasn't there last year.
right,
So,
okay.
yeah,
So it's actually,
that's a subtotal percentage increase of just that section.
okay.
Yeah.
But again, that's 2023 budget versus the 2022.
That should be 2022.
Oh,
I-
Tom,
yes.
I got you.
Yes, that should be 2022.
That's what I thought.
Another Scrivener's error. I'm getting good at this.
Ah, okay.
I got you.
Yeah, that should be 2022. We're not to 23 yet. We forecasted, but we're not.
Yeah.
Yeah, we won't get into that many weeds yet. And then at the very bottom, just threw a table out just to show the summary of the expense side of the budget from 2018 on. You can see in 2019 is when it was decided for that added positions. 2020, you see, well, why is it so much lower? Well, again, COVID money. And then 2021 is back basically where the expenses are, including that position. And in 2022 is, pretty much on par for that. And again, final adjustments in personnel will probably trim that.
So I think I might be seeing what you're seeing, TJ. It's 212,
Yeah, it's just,
600
it's not
now,
from that,
and it was 59
yeah.
last time. That seemed like more than a 76% increase.
Yeah, it's because of that 150.
It is.
It's not, 212.6 is not the denominator, or,
Right.
yeah.
Got it.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
actually 212.6 minus 150.
Got it.
Yeah. So if you look overall at the very bottom, 173, that's the percentage increase over 2021. So fall in line of what the overall expenses would be. And again, proposed, we'll be trimming and factoring up the bulk of the budget, which is the personnel related expenses. So these are conservative estimates at this point.
One of the things we have done the last couple of years is we have not done the 5-year outlook for a while.
Yeah.
And I asked Rob to do it for this year because I think it's important we start looking at blocks of 5 years as far as long-range planning. And I know a couple of years we looked at it with Mark. I think the last city manager, we didn't look at it that much. We did have some of those numbers out there, but I think the 5-year outlook's almost as important as the current year because we're setting a trend as to where we're going, especially with the transfer monies going back and forth. And then none of this has capital in it yet. The capital's gonna be a separate, we're gonna review it at our
Right,
next meeting.
capital would be, yes, correct. We've got that for the next meeting.
So looking at the, I don't remember the right term, pro forma? Let's go with that.
Yeah.
The pro forma, for 5 years out, getting into 2027. Are we looking at potential plans to secure the fund balance? Is it gonna require a levy?
I think it's a little bit early. We want to see, first of all, the effect of the economy, make sure that the trends of that, there's some estimates, and they're conservative, right? So, for instance, we're only estimating a 0.5% change in increased revenue through the existing millage. Some years that's been 2.9, some years that's been, 1.7, this, that, and the other. So as we get through and true up, that will help. But these are just conservative based on just like a 0.5% increase, what that situation would look like, almost kind of a worst case scenario, hope that would be worst case scenario. I guess 0 would be worst case scenario, but we're gonna leave at least the assumption that that's not going to be the case. That's factoring on all of the things, factoring in some assumptions on salary increases. Of course, there's collective bargaining agreements that will denote and dictate that. So there are some variables that aren't exacts, but we just kind of plugged in some standard basic assumptions on 0.5% and 2% for salaries, et cetera, and also those are carried in the growth of the various sources of revenue. For instance, grants. One nice grant will really help and offset, but that's factoring in no grants. Just based on supporting what we know we've got year to year. EMS billing's another thing. Call volume has been consistent. It's up a little bit, so that is generating some revenue. But carrying that out on what the current this year's trend is from year to year is basically what that is. So we're looking at starting to affect the fund balance. Which we are a little bit each year currently, and there's fund balance there. And as we get and we identify what we want our fund balance policy to be, that will really help define at what point in time do we need to restructure some things, take a look at some things, look at what projects are down the pipe, which ones we'll be able to do, whether it be capital, and then of course your operations expenses before we look at any type of suggested change in revenue. Of course, that's obviously council's decision and policy, but we'll want to analyze that and give you some real actuals from 2021, which will be part of our part of our audit and first quarter presentation in the next year. That's really when we kind of start some forecasting for the '23 budget. The budget's it's a year-round thing.
Yeah. The other thing too, TJ, is the transfers in are only 50,000 a year. In previous years, we transferred as much as 200,000. So if we kept a policy, we could afford to bring from general fund 200,000 a year. That dramatically
Sure.
affects the result.
Okay.
Right. And for instance, this year we reduced it, factoring on and counting on, one or two things, the contingency of issue 5, and still being able to maintain. So, the outcome of that will certainly modify and change our outlook as well. So, we'll have to factor that as something to consider as well.
Okay. I feel like I'm hogging the floor. I got more questions, but I can.
Yeah, like it. Good discussion.
Emergency dispatch. We had talked about that contract.
Yes.
Just want to know the status. I see the same projected rate going out.
Yeah, there's been no proposal. Me and the Xenia city manager have not sat down to specifically go after one of the proposals that I presented regarding looking at us as a sole customer, not combined with Sugar Creek Township. A study of the call volume shows that Sugar Creek takes some more calls than the City of Bellbrook does, and thereby splitting the cost of the overall service in half just doesn't seem to me fair to the Bellbrook taxpayers. So we want to make sure that we get our true accurate cost to make sure that, there isn't an imbalance of that. If it is truly 50-50, great, but just based on the call volume and numbers, it appears as if it may not be. So we're still in the process of analyzing that. I know when we talked a little bit about that when we were there visiting, and they're being very patient and very gracious, and we're just counting on next year what has been occurring for this year, and if we end up with a different deal sometime in the interim next year, well then, we can obviously make modifications. We don't anticipate it would be more. We would hope and maybe anticipate it'd be the same or a little less, but mainly we just want to make sure that we can accurately identify what our costs are for service to the City of Bellbrook. So we want to work with them in getting that accomplished.
And I think at the same time, isn't Xenia also looking at the overall cost of the program?
They are.
I saw that their number was, I forget, so many 100,000 they're putting into it, and they're thinking maybe they need to.
They're kind of in the
Sure,
same
well-
situation with the sheriff's office and a variety of things, so
Like costs are going up everywhere, and
they are,
everybody says, no, we need to go down.
yeah.
So yeah.
They provide to your point, noted when we were there, they provide a very good service.
Yep.
And there's a lot of technology there.
Yeah.
Costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
Just something to think about in terms of, being aware, what would the cost be to the city if we said, okay, we're done, we got to stand up our own service again.
Right.
Just to show, here's the benefit that we have.
Yeah, we can certainly get some estimates on that, because there's some numbers, there's some equipment numbers and personnel numbers out there, and yeah, that's certainly, and that's a valid point to make, to show.
I don't have
What the
anything to base
benefit
it
is.
on, but I'm certain it would be a lot higher than that.
Yes,
Staffing would be-
yeah.
Yeah.
That's half of one person, so we would have to staff it with at least 9, so we'll start there.
That's the end of the story.
Our biggest thing was, at that time, in forever, we had one person, and the township had 1 or 2 people, they kind of varied back and forth. We had one person manning dispatch, and the concern that fortunately we never had to deal with was, what if we had a whole wave of calls come in at one point in time, like a big disaster, who's gonna handle the calls? And heaven forbid, what if something would ever happen to our dispatch operator there
Yeah.
and miss the calls? And this, at least, I mean, for me, what sold me on Greene County or Greene Central was the redundancy. And having a whole room full of people that can jump in if they have to, and hopefully if we have a major problem, it's not gonna impact everybody in the county, but maybe it will, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think one of the other things that's helped us too is the officers and staff able to communicate with the township. They're on the same radios, which they always got a heads up, and we're in the same area, so that helps.
Sure, interoperability is a key thing, and not just because my background's in public safety, but I know the 2 chiefs here Chief has already mentioned his desire to switch to New World. You'll hear the same from Chief Doherty because of that interoperability, those shared services, access to records, combined responses, et cetera. So it just makes really good sense.
Okay.
I don't think going back isn't even an option.
But I think, I agree, it's a valid point to show the comparison, that if this is a value, we continue to demonstrate that this was the right decision to make or whatever, and that is a good exercise to have the comparison of, well, had we not had this option and we were to stand up one, what would that be? So we can certainly include that.
One last question I have. We talk about, I think it was termed ISO rating. And we talk about the grade that we get there, and if things didn't come in as good, rates would go up. Which line items would get affected, or do they not show up here? Are they more in?
So with the ISO rating, the insurance service office rating, we really wouldn't affect any of our cost in the budget because we go down to a lower score from a 2 to a 3. The ISO rating is there to help more commercial business than anything. It helps them get a break in their insurance ratings for their businesses.
Gotcha.
We don't have a whole lot of that here. Fortunately for Bellbrook, it's more of a bragging right than anything to be able to stout that we're in the top 5% of Ohio to be able to maintain an ISO 2.
All right, thanks.
It also does, if I'm not mistaken, Chief, where the benefit comes is to the actual taxpayer and the cost of insurance for their homes.
Correct. I'm sorry, yes.
They would see changes in their premiums for their homeowners insurance for safety ratings within the community. So having good response times, quality planning, equipment to be able to maximize the response and coordinated effort, that helps maintain that ISO rating and helps pass that cost on truly to the citizen, to the taxpayer.
Correct. All right.
I did a little bit of research on that. A lot of things factor into that rating, training, our water system. That's a big one. You
Yes.
know, We've got a great system for that.
We do.
Fire plugs everywhere, that's one of, there's a lot of things that training, all that stuff is entered. And for a small fire department, that's impressive.
Yes.
It is very impressive.
It is, you're right. There's a lot of pieces to that puzzle. The training that they do, the fire flow and pressure, that's a big thing. There's the area of the community to the south that is just south of our city limits. It's well known that they have issues with flow and pressure, substandard to be able to sustain fire suppression and firefighting should one happen, like a multi-pile catching on fire. There should be investments and improvements to that system.
Yeah.
And, perhaps maybe we even look into, offering extension of our service to help improve the service delivery to that area and beyond. So that's something we want to keep in mind. Well, we can jump into police.
Thank you, Chief Pizarro. Appreciate the input, appreciate you being here tonight.
Thank you.
I'll start off with the same. We've got the kind of forecast sheet. You see it's a, set up the same. However, there's a little bit of difference in terms of the less red on it. We don't get into red until a little bit later, which after looking at this in analysis, this is a good example of when we look at and finalize the budget, we actually will likely want to look at addressing the differences in that subsidies. And Mr. Hope, to your point, what do we look at in the future to address these? Again, this is as we are currently, and this isn't a suggested plan. This is as we are currently. Part of addressing the plan is a shift or reallocation of the funds that we do have, and restructuring some of the financing or some of the revenue that we have coming in. And here's an example where some of the balance of that public safety subsidy especially if we have years of higher expenses with fire, we shift some of the subsidy that's still at $150,000 to police to fire to help offset that, because police doesn't need it as much. They did at one time as they took on certain things, but which was attempt, I think a few years ago, for an increase in millage, and that necessitated an increase in the subsidy. But as we can see now, we've been able to contain some costs. You know, some of that likely has to do with the dispatching and other things. And we'll be able to look at taking this as an example of seeing how we can blend these two public safety factors and still maintain the important elements such as stormwater management, our interior streets paving program, without affecting them, but then looking at the balance between police and fire within public safety. So if you look at their forecast, there is still a spend down in the projected fund balance, but it goes out another year or so based on the same current models, and you know, it's kind of explanatory in itself. So jumping into the police fund, same type of scenario and situation. We have a lot of similarities from one year to the next. Not a whole lot of changes, with the exception of part-time, and if we look at we will look at this. One of the things that I want to verify with the personnel expenses with the chief, because again, as I mentioned, full disclosure, we have not drilled down and really looked at personnel other than calculating some current staffing and what our estimates of increases are. But the part-time wages, it seems as if, starting off what was budgeted for this year and what has been spent this year, is significantly less. You know, and that has to do with management of the police agency, and I believe that that's something that the chief is probably going to sustain. I know that we've recently looked at adding another part-time, replace somebody that left or a vacancy, but the amount of time and hours used, we may see an adjustment to that, but the likelihood of having that entire amount to what it was for this year is highly unlikely. So that's going to skew and throw off, you know, a big 488%er. But again, that's just that line item for reduction. The rest of the personnel expenses, again, are just based on estimates of annual increases, what the collective bargaining agreements say, and what our estimates for healthcare. Again, our healthcare isn't until mid-year, but our experience so far has been good, and we feel that we'll have a pretty good renewal rate overall for the entire city. So jumping into the operational stuff on page 2, we see some moderate changes here and there, and one of the biggest is, again, with the current RMS software and tech. And Chief, if you want to explain your side of some of the RMS reviews, and forgive me, records management system or police reporting. I use the jargon, so I'll let you explain that.
Well, as some of you may know, I came here in large part. There was a number of factors. One of them was the disaster, I thought, which was New World at the time. That was about 9 years ago. They used that as a beta system in Xenia, and it was just wrought with problems, beginning to end. So didn't have that here. So fast forward 8 years later, that system has come along much better. They've worked through a lot of their problems, and as it turns out, Bellbrook is the sole agency in the county that is not tied into New World. And it's not called New World any longer, but the system allows for us, if you can picture a hub and all the agencies as spokes into a wheel, everybody can look at everybody else's reports, wants and warrants, FI cards, just shared information just completely, versus being on an island by ourselves and keeping information that we may use and or we may not ever. So it's a great opportunity. It's actually after the initial outlay year to year, it's actually cheaper for us to go to that significantly. So I think it's a good deal. We've met with the county, with the sheriff, a number of times to talk about deals. We've given kind of our best guesstimate worksheet to the city managers to what we think the costs will be. So just think it's a good time for us to move to that direction. Emergitech has served us well. It was a good system, still a good thing for us, but I think times have changed, and you wouldn't believe the laughter from the people that, with me as the chief coming back and asking as a proponent, like wanting to come to New World, because I was a staunch advocate against it, because they, for a number of reasons, they just didn't give us the time and attention that I thought we deserved for the money we were putting out. But none of that exists in this model and what we're trying to achieve with this RMS.
I would note the same differences. There was some COVID money used from personnel, difference between 19 to 20, 2021. That's where we have that gray column. The additional we have some additional increase just based on some of the increased costs. Speaking of dispatch, in the dispatch, we factored in about a 2.5% increase based on the possibility of call load. As there's more enforcement activities, a little bit more proactive activities regarding whether it be traffic enforcement or other type of things, that's going to increase some of the call volume. So we're anticipating an increase, so we're trying to be a little bit conservative in those estimates. One other thing of note, if in some of the notes that you see here, just because there's main reductions, for instance, personal protective equipment, that was at 1 year large because of the purchase of tasers. Those have been purchased, so that's not occurring again this year. That might turn into more of a maintenance related item, but in terms of that, we just kind of kept those notes carried over. Also, previously, you see a decent reduction. We still have, I think we still have the PO for the bike, or did we get that bike yet this year, Chief?
No, sir.
Yeah.
It's still on back order.
Still in back order, right, yeah, so that's still something that's this year. That's not carrying over next year. That was just a note that was included from part of the reduction coming in from this year, because that's a purchase that would be considered for this year. So other than that, you can see the bottom there, the smaller table comparing the changes from year to year. We talked we talked about the difference in some of the changes. We have an additional personnel from 2018 up through today. If you look at the comparative figures, there's slight increases, and most of those again are related to the estimates and change in personnel costs. One thing that we will be budgeting is that will be new for next year is payment of vacation excess carryover. That was negotiated in the last agreement. I'm actually have a conference with the union and the union rep tomorrow to make sure that we're very clear on the language, because there's a couple of different interpretations. And it doesn't affect a whole lot of officers, but some that have a larger balance, we change them to an accrual type of basis on the last contract, which cuts a maximum allowed balance, and they'll have the opportunity for the one-time payout of that surplus. So that will there's a couple of officers that will apply to, and that will be a one-time cost, but will be not huge, but relatively significant. So
Trying to correlate the RMS conversation to the budget. What line item was that?
So that'll be a combination of a couple of things, mainly out of the information technology maintenance. It'll be like license fees. Fortunately, difference between police and fire, the police department have the terminals in the cars, so it's mainly maintenance and software and license agreements and things like that. That's where the main difference is going to be.
So it has nothing to do with leads.
No, leads is a license access that each agency has to pay to maintain a original agency identifier number.
So 5360 is really the only line item.
Yes, for now, as we look into if there's actual additional software components or maybe a modem or something like that, we'll look at that in capital purchases as part of vehicles and such. But looking at our ongoing maintenance, that would be what we project to be some changes in some annual maintenance costs for that new software and implementation of that software.
So it sounded like a really good thing that we're moving to it.
Yes.
Just trying to wrap my head around how much does that cost?
Yeah, overall, the first year it'll be a lot higher because there's obviously a transition and, buy-in cost. Other than that, I believe, and I didn't have it with me, do you remember off the top of your head, the difference from what we're paying now for service agreements with the current vendor compared to the new one? I think it's just about a wash.
If we go to New World from our current RMS, it is about
A little less.
It's cheaper to go to the new RMS.
Yeah.
It's about $5,000 to $7,000
Yeah.
cheaper per year, and it's a far better product because we're getting so much more information as it relates to everybody else in the county.
So it's just the upfront cost.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
And can you kind of give us a summary of what extra things that brings for us? Is that something that's you're able to share at all?
What we get for the new RMS.
What does it add to our capabilities? Does it make us quicker, more responsive?
It is just a better product. What we're getting is, if you can imagine, we can access Xenia, the county, Beaver Creek, Fairborn. We can access all their reports from the car. We can access all the FIs, all this information. We can see vehicles on stops. We can get the information that's going on in real time on the stops. Say we just had this guy on an FI. He was a suspicious person in a car break-in over here. You may check, this, or have information that they can give to us on somebody that they've had that may live in Bellbrook, or we have stopped on a traffic stop. So much better information. The information, I would say, is hard to even quantify. Honestly, it's just much better. Can't compare the two.
Thank
So
you.
now we get that information from dispatch, if we get it, if we request it, if they have it.
The only information we would get from dispatch is the only thing that was available through, the state, or what's on their record.
Okay.
I'm talking about information that might be tied to a individual report, or a field identification card, or officer notes. They can actually send a chat to us and say, hey, look, this guy was, last time we dealt with him, he had illegal drugs in the center console. You may check there if you deal with them. Or we have them for a robbery. If you look, please look for some criminal tools in the car, things like that.
Gotcha.
Instantly. We would never have that technology currently, or nobody knows what we're doing, but us, so Sugar Creek, we kind of tied to them because we're on the same channel, but still we get information from Sugar Creek, but at such a dribble compared to what we're going to have from countywide service. And agencies our side, Yellow Springs, Cedarville, Jamestown, they'll have it, and talk to the chiefs, and they really like it, so
Sounds like where we need to be.
it is.
And as a resident, basically, there's assurances that you can help keep us safer, help keep more real-time criminals off the streets.
Definitely, it's safer for the officers, safer for us to be able to get information, and make the residents we serve safer as well. Absolutely.
Thank you.
One other point that I just want to augment that the chief said is, on the back end of it, administrative reporting seems to be significantly enhanced as well. I know the chief, both chiefs do a real good job of analyzing information and data that they receive. And sometimes the systems limit your ability and they end up doing a whole lot of hand use. But to free up their time and see some of the administrative reporting that comes out of the system, it will allow them to identify some trends and maybe provide a different response and address any areas that seem to be problem issues as well. So administrative reporting for that system seems to be a lot stronger than what the current one is as well.
So you're probably all familiar with the OCLEA that we are involved in, and we have to keep updated with standards, statewide standards.
It's Ohio Collaborative.
Law Enforcement Association. So there's requirements that we have in that, and one of them is be able to determine, who we stop, what those people look like, what's the result of the stop, and the current system we have, we don't have a way of really doing that to the definition that the state would like us to do. This new system allows us to type in a couple things, hit a button, and it prints out a report. I can tell you, Captain Carmen, and just the monthly reports that you guys get, the stats up and down, takes some work for him to put that together. This new RMS would allow this to be much quicker, much easier, probably a easier report to look at and see. So we look forward to that. I know he would be over the moon. So, he would be.
Hey, Rob, not specific to police or fire, but with this new reporting system for police and fire, with our new SSI software, we have everything now as far as all of our reporting systems relatively new, up to date, and we just have going through conversions.
Yeah, that would be correct. Your two primary, systems for doing that. We've got with the SSI, we also have a utility billing,
Right.
and managing that, which that's very complex in and of itself. So I think combination of that, it's worth the investment, taking the next step forward with public safety, because the efficiencies that come out of it to be able to do some of that administrative reporting is really key, that in and of itself, not to mention what's available to the field units. And having in-cab responses in the apparatus and be able to look things up. You guys are there a little bit having mobile capabilities, but it really takes the fire department to the next level.
Just in addition to, I don't mean to belabor this point, the pluses on this, but at some point soon, they're going to be able to have license readers in the cars. So gone would be the tickets that we hand write out. You could simply take the person's license and run it through a reader, and it'll print out on a little printer, Zetron paper, I think, and you would give that to them. Totally alleviates all the things that we do now. That automatically uploads to XMC, Xenia Municipal Court. Right now, we have to go up 2, 3, 4 times a week. We take our arrest paperwork tickets up to court, so it's delivered in a timely manner. So it's just the wave of the future. Like I came to this body a few years ago and told you the type of vehicles that we needed. This is the same kind of thing that we're looking at. This is just the way it is, and we're really the last ones. Well, we are the last ones in the county to have it, so it's time for us to do that. It's going to be well worth the money too.
Speaking of vehicles, you want to announce
Yes, we have
a little surprise?
Change your vehicles again?
Both of our cruisers
Yeah.
are in that we've had.
They're going on motorcycles. Yeah.
Sidecars. So we have both of our cars in. One of them is already striped. You'll see it if you haven't already on our website. It's they're dark blue, and then the doors are white. Has a new design on the side. It's really quite fetching, I think. So we have both cars, and the second one's going to go to Danco to get striped. So we'll have that done this Wednesday, and that's going to take a little longer for the parts to come in, where we take it to KE Rose to get the install for that stuff. But
We're hoping to get the chips to make the car start next year, but they're here. But we've got the cars.
right,
But we have the bicycle coming too, so that'll.
right.
Yeah,
And
so
foot
you got
patrol.
options. But the new look of the cars is pretty cool. Check it out.
forward to it.
Really stands out. We're nice visibility change for the community, residents seeing the cars up and down the neighborhoods. It'll be a nice change.
Good deal, good deal. Anything else on the police fund?
Yeah, I had just a couple questions. And this probably goes for fire too. How are we going to capture years forward? Like if we're looking back at 2018 now, and then, several years from now out, if we look back at 21, how are we going to footnote, oh, that was ARPA funding?
Right.
So,
That's actually part of the process that I'm doing now, to build that historical document that year to year is basically added to, so that when we are here next year, we'll have everything that was included in notes regarding this in there that we have, access to. There's Mr. Schlagek built a really good spreadsheet that has a lot of formulas for trending and for this, that, and the other. Some of those formulas have been broken by manual input of some numbers.
Okay.
So I've been working hard to kind of reinstall the formulas to have it generate those numbers so that it's accurate moving forward. So that's why I've picked 2018. Anything before that, it's just I don't have the and that's far enough back just to get us to where, hey, are we within a trend in 2022? If we look back 4 years, where are we in that trend, and then where are we for the future trend? So that's
okay.
that's a work in progress, and part of what we want to have a living, breathing worksheet document separate from the accounting system. The accounting system does a good job of accounting for what we input to it. This is our accrual, this is our analysis tool, and we want this to be up to date, fed with the data from the accounting system, but more something that we can manipulate to put in different variables and factors and some formulas for estimates and things. So
Okay.
we're about there. This was, I didn't have this, if you noticed, with the other two departments. It's a work in progress, so we've got it for these two because they've got significant subsidies. I wanted to see how that was factoring in, we're getting it all fixed up. So this year might be a little bit kind of, I don't want to use the word hodgepodgey. It'll be accurate, but it might be a little bit quirky. Looking forward, we want it to be clean, but looking back, going back to those couple of years where we fit in the trend, we'll be able to do that more, of not based on this detailed of a worksheet, but more just revenues and expenses, not looking at line item. That'll really help us gauge our trend, where we maybe look at some brackets of expenditures rather than 15 different line items within one thing. We look at more, that high level stuff. So we're working on putting that together for the overall budget presentation. And then we also want to set some policies. We want to have some definitions for our funds. We haven't had that in the past. That will help when we do our gap conversion, to allow the auditors to come in. If we have some of that work pre-done, we just have to do it once. So put the effort into it. That reduces their workload, and then we can talk to them about their fee next year after we reduce their workload, right? So, we want a system that is up to date and accurate, to where when we start to build into a next year, we already know what we're looking at. We don't have to go back and do this and, fill in a bunch of blanks. We're up to date. We're accurate. When we're looking at this monthly, everything is up to date. Our actuals at the end of the month, when we close and reconcile, those actuals are transferred right into here. And, we can take a look in a snapshot real time, almost month to month.
Okay.
So that's where we're gonna be.
And the key thing Rob said, keep in mind our budget system is built on spreadsheets. So, you got a lot of risk with that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, we've been able to go back and bend some of the formulas that have been kind of broken in the past. But it's always been kind of a budget exercise on Excel versus having its own software package that would run all that stuff and allow maybe more feedback, more commentary.
Okay.
What Rob's doing right now to enhance it, I think, is gonna get us where we need to be.
Yeah, I think it'll be good, and, it'll be good for discussions and the regular quarterly budget updates and financial reports, to where we can see not only just that quarter, but we'll see it, month end to month end to month end, to see where that quarter fits in, so,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, 2020 and 2021 are gonna be quirky
They are.
in any historic
They-
reporting.
They will be, you know, you had a reduction in expenses because there were just some things that you didn't do. And then you had, you know, some changes because you had the gift of the COVID money. So, but overall, we can still show it and have it all add up.
It'll show up.
Yep, that's what we want to do, show it all up.
Okay. I realize we're kind of running out of time, but I just wanted to ask, and maybe you said it earlier and I didn't hear, but from the transfers in, from fire, we saw a reduction, and police, we're seeing it tick up. Is there a reason for that? What's the reason behind that?
The only thing I can describe or explain was from 2018 on, it appeared that there was more of a need to cover operations in police. However, that trend has kind of changed. We're seeing where there's more impact in covering the cost of operations and fire than police. So, that was based on what we've currently got. That will help us identify the plan moving forward of making adjustments to that subsidy within public safety. Quite frankly, at the final end of this, we'll see a change in that for this budget year. Two things have impact on that. Number one, issue 5, so that subsidy remains. And then number 2, looking at the accurate balance between what is best use of that subsidy. Right now, it's towards fire because they're being impacted more from their current fund balance. So once we have our fund balance policy in place where we want to make sure to be at within those funds, that will be the final key to figuring out what that actual amount will be. But the only answer I have as to why is because there was an increased cost in police. There was an attempt for additional millage that didn't pass. Therefore, the subsidy came out a little bit more. But now it seems as if the police operations have leveled off, and some of the recent equipments, change in personnel, looking at the possibility of some renovation to a station to accommodate making land downtown available and usable. That's where some of that shift of priority is obviously going to need to go in the next coming years. So we'll kind of see that trend shift, if that's what council wants.
Yeah. Chief, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's about 7 o'clock. Let's go ahead and wrap up our budget work session. Take about a 2-minute break, and then we'll be back at you.